The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers for the third time tonight, clattering against the cracked concrete of our driveway. I cursed under my breath and wiped my hands on an oil-stained rag that had seen better decades. The ancient Volvo's engine block stared back at me like some mechanical middle finger, mocking my Saturday night automotive therapy session. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Real glamorous life you're living, Sam, I muttered, fishing the wrench from under the car. At 42, I'd imagined I'd be doing something more dignified than wrestling with Swedish engineering in my driveway, while my neighbors pretended not to watch from behind their curtains. The kitchen window above me glowed warm yellow, and I could see Emily moving around inside. My wife of 8 years looked as polished as ever, even at 10 p.m. on a Saturday. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that effortless way that probably took 30 minutes to achieve, and she wore one of those silk blouses that cost more than my monthly gym membership. I was about to call it quits on the Volvo when Emily's voice drifted through the open window. She was on the phone, speaking in that hushed tone people use when they think no one's listening. "No, he suspects nothing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell him I'm at Dad's doing taxes. See you at the club in 20. I froze, wrench halfway to the engine block. The club? Emily belonged to exactly 0 clubs, unless you counted her book club that met once a month to drink wine and complain about their husbands, which, come to think of it, she hadn't attended in months. "Must be a real exclusive membership plan," I said to the Volvo, my voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that had gotten me through 2 decades of engineering meetings with idiots in expensive suits. I stayed crouched beside the car, listening. Emily's heels clicked across the kitchen tile, those ridiculous 4-inch things she wore to make herself feel important at the law firm where she worked as an associate. The sound grew fainter as she moved toward the front of the house. I know, she continued, her voice getting softer. "It's getting harder to make excuses, but what am I supposed to do? Tell him the truth?" She laughed, but it wasn't the laugh I'd fallen in love with during our college days. This was different, conspiratorial, secretive, the kind of laugh that made my stomach clench with a familiar dread I'd been trying to ignore for months. The front door opened and closed with a soft click. Through the gap under the car, I could see Emily's designer heels walking quickly toward her BMW. The engine started with that smooth German purr that made my Swedish piece of junk sound like a dying moose. I stayed under the Volvo until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then rolled out and sat on the cold concrete, staring at the oil stain that had been growing larger each week. The stain looked like a map of some country I'd never want to visit. Dark, spreading, permanent. "Well, this is just fantastic," I said to the empty driveway. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, but somehow felt completely different. The granite countertops Emily had insisted on during our kitchen renovation gleamed under the recessed lighting. The stainless steel appliances reflected my oil-stained face like funhouse mirrors, distorting my features into something I barely recognized. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and noticed Emily's coffee cup in the sink, lipstick stain on the rim still warm. She'd been drinking coffee at 10 p.m., which meant she was planning to stay up late. Very late. My phone buzzed with a text from Red, my boxing coach at the gym downtown. "You missed practice tonight. Everything okay, tough guy?" I typed back, "Car trouble. See you Monday." But that was a lie. The Volvo ran fine. I just liked having something to fix, something to control, unlike everything else in my life lately. Another text popped up, this one from Emily. "At Dad's house working on taxes. Going to be a long night. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message for a full minute, then walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the driveway where I'd been working. From this angle, Emily would have had a perfect view of me under the car. She would have seen me there, heard me cursing at the engine, known I was listening, unless she hadn't been paying attention, unless she'd been too distracted by whoever was on the other end of that phone call. I scrolled through my contacts and found George's number. Emily's father was a retired accountant who lived alone in a tidy ranch house about 15 minutes away. He was also the most punctual, organized man I'd ever met, the kind of guy who did his taxes in January and kept receipts organized by date and category. It was 10:47 p.m. George went to bed at 9:30 every night and had for the past 20 years. I called anyway. "Hello?" George's voice was groggy but alert. In the background, I could hear the television, some late-night talk show. "Hey, George, it's Sam. Sorry to call so late, but Emily said she was over there working on taxes. I wanted to make sure she had her reading glasses. She left them on the kitchen counter." There was a pause. A long pause. "Sam," George said slowly, "Emily's not here. I finished my taxes 3 weeks ago. She knows that." The beer bottle slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending glass and foam across the tile. I stared down at the mess, watching the beer seep into the grout lines Emily had spent hours scrubbing when we first moved in. "Sam, you there?" "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, I'm here. Must have been confused. She probably said Becca's house." "Probably," George agreed, but his voice carried that same tone I used when I was lying to myself about the Volvo's transmission. After I hung up, I spent 20 minutes cleaning up the broken glass, cutting my finger twice in the process. The small wounds bled more than they should have, leaving dark drops on the white tile like some kind of domestic crime scene. I sat at the kitchen table with another beer and Emily's laptop, which she'd left open to a document titled Henderson vs. Martinez, Discovery Motions. Legal jargon filled the screen, but I wasn't really reading it. I was thinking about that laugh, that conspiratorial tone, the way she'd said, "the club," like it was some kind of code. Emily came home at 2:17 a.m. I know because I was lying in bed, staring at the digital clock, listening to every car that passed our house. When her BMW finally pulled into the driveway, I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. She moved quietly through the house, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floors. The bathroom door closed, and I heard the shower start. Emily never showered at night. She was a morning shower person, had been since college. Said it helped wake her up. When she finally slipped into bed beside me, she smelled like expensive soap and something else, something that wasn't her usual perfume. "How are the taxes?" I asked quietly. She went rigid beside me. "Fine. Dad's getting a decent refund this year." "That's good. He called earlier, by the way. Around 11. Said he couldn't find some receipt you needed." Another pause. Longer this time. "Oh," she said finally. "He must have found it. We got everything sorted out." I rolled over to face her in the dark. "I'm sure you did." Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that made everything look like a crime scene waiting to happen. I stood at the kitchen window, watching Emily load her briefcase into the BMW while talking on her phone. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the animation in her gestures, the way she smiled and tucked her hair behind her ear, the same gesture she'd used when we first started dating. She caught me watching and waved, that practiced smile spreading across her face like butter on toast. I waved back and took another sip of coffee that tasted like disappointment. My phone rang as her car disappeared around the corner. "You look like hell, Sammy." Red's gravelly voice filled the kitchen. "Trouble at home or just bad whiskey?" "Both, probably." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "I'll be at the gym in 20. "Good. We need to work on your footwork. You've been fighting like a guy with something on his mind." Red wasn't wrong. For the past month, my boxing had been sloppy, distracted. I'd been taking hits I should have seen coming, missing combinations that used to be automatic. Red called it life interference, when whatever was happening outside the ring started affecting what happened inside it. The gym was a converted warehouse in the industrial part of town, the kind of place that smelled like sweat, leather, and broken dreams. Red had owned it for 30 years, and it looked exactly the same as it had the day I first walked in 5 years ago. Cracked mirrors, heavy bags held together with duct tape, and a boxing ring that had seen more blood than a battlefield hospital. "So," Red said as I wrapped my hands, "you gonna tell me what's eating you, or do I have to beat it out of you?" I told him. All of it. The phone call, the lies, the late-night shower, the way Emily had been different lately. Red listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small grunting sounds that could have meant anything. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying my hands as I finished wrapping them. "How long you been married?" he asked finally. 8 years. 8 years. He shook his head. "Long enough to know when something's wrong, not long enough to know how to fix it." "So what do I do?" Red walked over to the heavy bag and held it steady. "You got 2 choices, Sammy. You can pretend you didn't hear what you heard, go home, and live with it. Or you can find out the truth." I threw a combination at the bag. Jab, cross, hook. The leather exploded with a satisfying thud that echoed through the empty gym. "And if I don't like the truth?" "Then at least you'll know what you're dealing with." I spent the next hour beating the hell out of that heavy bag, imagining it was everything I couldn't control. Emily's lies, my own stupidity for not seeing it sooner, the smug face of whatever bastard was making my wife laugh like a teenager with a crush. By the time I got home, I had a plan. Emily's car was already in the driveway, which was unusual. She normally didn't get home until after 6, and it was barely 4 o'clock. I found her in the kitchen, still in her work clothes, but with her shoes off, standing at the counter with a glass of wine. "You're home early," I said, dropping my gym bag by the door. "Slow day. Thought I'd start dinner." She gestured toward the counter, where she'd laid out ingredients for pasta, Emily's go-to meal when she was stressed or distracted. "That's nice. Hey, I was thinking, why don't we invite your dad over for dinner this weekend? We haven't seen him in a while." Emily's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. "Dad? This weekend?" "Yeah, Saturday night. I could grill some steaks, open a nice bottle of wine, make it special." "I don't know if he's free." "I'll call him." I pulled out my phone. What could he be doing? It's not like he has a busy social calendar. "Sam, wait." But I was already dialing. George answered on the second ring. "George, it's Sam. How about dinner Saturday night? Emily's been missing you." "That sounds wonderful," George said, his voice brightening. "I haven't had a good home-cooked meal in weeks." I looked at Emily while I talked. She was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Great. 7 o'clock. Oh, and George, thanks again for letting Emily help with your taxes the other night. I know how much you appreciate having someone organized to help with all that paperwork." There was a pause. "Sam, I told you. I finished my taxes weeks ago. Emily wasn't here Saturday night." Right. My mistake. See you Saturday." I hung up and looked at Emily. Her face had gone pale, and she was staring at me like I'd just pulled a gun. "So," I said casually, "want to tell me where you really were Saturday night?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, opened it again. She started, then stopped. "I was with Becca. We went out for drinks." "Becca." I nodded slowly. "Your friend from work?" "Yes. The one who's been out of town for 2 weeks visiting her sister in Denver." Emily's wine glass slipped from her fingers and exploded against the kitchen floor, sending red wine and glass shards across the white tile. It was the second glass I'd watched shatter in this kitchen in 3 days, and I was starting to see a pattern. "How did you—" she began, then caught herself. "How did I know Becca was out of town? Because she posted about it on Facebook every day for the past 2 weeks. Pictures of the mountains, her sister's kids, That little coffee shop she found in downtown Denver. Emily stared down at the broken glass and spreading wine stain. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright with tears that might have been real. Sam, I can explain. I'm sure you can, but not right now. I stepped carefully around the glass and wine. Right now you need to clean this up before it stains the grout, and I need to go buy steaks for Saturday dinner. I left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and lies, and drove to the grocery store. But instead of buying steaks, I sat in the parking lot and called Becca's number. Sam? Becca sounded surprised. Is everything okay? Hi, Becca. Quick question. Did you and Emily go out for drinks Saturday night? Saturday? No, I'm still in Denver. I don't fly back until Wednesday. Why? No reason. Just trying to remember something Emily mentioned. Have a safe flight home. I sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, watching people load groceries into their cars and drive home to their normal lives. Lives where their wives didn't lie about where they spent their Saturday nights. Lives where the biggest problem was whether to buy regular or premium gas. When I finally went back home, Emily had cleaned up the wine and glass. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, pretending to work. She didn't look up when I walked in. I bought ribeyes, I said, setting the grocery bags on the counter. Your dad's favorite. She still didn't look up. Sam, we need to talk. Saturday, I said. We'll all talk Saturday. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I'd spent the afternoon preparing, cleaning the house, setting the table with our wedding china, chilling a bottle of wine that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Emily had offered to help twice, but I'd waved her off both times. I've got it handled, I told her. You just worry about looking pretty. She was in the bedroom getting ready, and I could hear her moving around up there, opening and closing drawers, the soft whisper of fabric. Normally, I loved those sounds. The domestic symphony of my wife preparing for an evening. Tonight, they just reminded me of all the other evenings she'd gotten dressed up to go somewhere else. George arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, because George always arrived exactly on time. He stood on our front porch holding a bottle of wine and wearing the same navy blazer he'd worn to every dinner party for the past decade. Sam! He clapped me on the shoulder as he stepped inside. Something smells fantastic. Ribeyes on the grill, garlic mashed potatoes, that salad Emily makes with the fancy cheese you like. Sounds perfect. Where is Emily? Upstairs, putting on her face. You know how it is. But George's expression suggested he didn't know how it was. His bushy eyebrows drew together in that way they did when he was working through a complicated tax problem. Sam, he said quietly, about the other night when you called. Let's talk about that over dinner, I said, taking his coat. Can I get you a drink? Emily appeared at the top of the stairs wearing a black dress I'd never seen before. It was elegant, expensive looking, the kind of thing she might wear to impress someone important. She came down slowly, her heels clicking on the hardwood steps, and kissed her father on the cheek. Hi, Dad. You look handsome. You look beautiful, sweetheart. New dress? This old thing? Emily smoothed the fabric over her hips. I've had it forever. I poured wine while Emily and George made small talk about his garden, the weather, a book he was reading about the Civil War. Normal family dinner conversation, except for the undercurrent of tension that ran through every word like an electrical wire. The steaks were perfect, medium rare, with those beautiful grill marks that made everything look like a magazine photo. I'd outdone myself with the sides, too, and George made appreciative noises as he cut into his meat. This is wonderful, Sam. You should open a restaurant. I like my day job too much. Engineering pays better than cooking. Speaking of work, George said, turning to Emily. How are things at the firm? Still working those long hours? Emily's fork paused halfway to her mouth. It's busy season. You know how it is. I do indeed. Though I have to say I was surprised when Sam called the other night looking for you. I thought you knew I'd finished my taxes. The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emily set down her fork and reached for her wine glass. I was helping Becca with her taxes, she said. I must have told Sam I was helping you. Easy mistake. Ah, George nodded. How is Becca? I haven't seen her in ages. She's fine, busy with work. Didn't she just get back from Denver? I asked casually, cutting another piece of steak. Emily's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Denver? Yeah, visiting her sister. She posted all those pictures on Facebook. Beautiful mountains out there. Right, Denver. Yes, she just got back. George was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. So she was here Saturday night helping with taxes, but she was also in Denver? The silence stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Emily stared at her plate, her face flushed pink. I could hear the grandfather clock in the living room ticking, the low hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, Emily looked up. Okay, you caught me. I wasn't with Becca Saturday night. George set down his fork. Emily, I was out with friends from work. We went to that new place downtown, the one with the rooftop bar. I didn't think you'd approve, Dad, so I made up the story about taxes. Why wouldn't I approve of you going out with friends? George asked. Emily glanced at me, then back at her father. Because one of them was Nick Russo. He's a junior partner at the firm, and people talk. You know how office gossip can be. Nick Russo. Finally, a name. Nick Russo, I repeated. Should I know that name? He's just a colleague. But he's going through a messy divorce, and people might get the wrong idea if they saw us together. What kind of wrong idea? George asked. Emily's phone, which was sitting on the table next to her plate, lit up with a text message. The screen was facing up, and we could all see the preview. Nick, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? The rubber band snapped. Emily grabbed for the phone, but I was faster. I picked it up and read the message aloud. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? I looked up at Emily, then at George. Just colleagues, huh? George's face had gone pale. He looked older suddenly, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Emily, he said quietly, please tell me this isn't what it looks like. Emily's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing her carefully applied makeup. Dad, I can explain. Can you? George's voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. Because it looks like you've been lying to me, to both of us. I scrolled through Emily's phone, finding more messages from Nick. They weren't explicit, but they were intimate in a way that made my stomach turn. References to inside jokes, plans to meet, complaints about having to be secretive. How long? I asked. Emily wiped her eyes with her napkin. Sam, please. How long have you been sleeping with him? George flinched at the word sleeping, but he didn't look away. He was waiting for an answer, too. 3 months, Emily whispered. 3 months. I thought back over the past 3 months, remembering all the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the new clothes, the way she'd started working out more, buying expensive lingerie that I'd assumed was for my benefit. 3 months, I repeated, and you've been lying to me every single day for 3 months. It's not like that. What's it like then? I stood up, Emily's phone still in my hand. Explain it to me. Explain it to your father. Tell us what it's like. Emily looked at George, whose face was a mask of disappointment and hurt. Then she looked back at me. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said. It just did. Nick and I were working late on a case and we started talking and one thing led to another. One thing led to another, I repeated. For 3 months. That's a lot of things leading to other things. George stood up slowly, his napkin falling from his lap to the floor. I think I should go, he said. Dad, please. No, Emily. I'm disappointed in you. More disappointed than I've ever been. He looked at me. Sam, thank you for dinner. I'm sorry it ended this way. I walked him to the door, while Emily sat at the table crying into her ruined makeup. George paused on the front porch and turned back to me. I'm sorry, son, he said. You deserved better than this. After he left, I went back to the dining room. Emily was still sitting at the table, surrounded by the ruins of our perfect dinner party. The candles were still flickering, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The expensive wine was still breathing in its crystal decanter. Everything looked exactly the same as it had an hour ago, except now our marriage was over. Sam, Emily said without looking up, I know you're angry. Angry? I laughed, and the sound was harsh and bitter in the quiet room. I'm not angry, Emily. Angry is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic. This is something else entirely. I picked up my phone and started taking pictures. The dinner table, Emily's tear-stained face, her phone with Nick's messages still visible on the screen. What are you doing? Documenting, I said, for the divorce. Sam, wait. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try to work it out? I looked at her sitting there in her expensive new dress, makeup smeared, hair disheveled, and felt something cold and final settle in my chest. Work it out? I said. Emily, you've been fucking another man for 3 months. You've lied to me, to your father, to everyone who cares about you. What exactly is there to work out? She flinched at the profanity, but I was past caring about her delicate sensibilities. I love you, she said desperately. I still love you. No, I said, heading for the stairs. You love the idea of me. You love having a husband who cooks dinner and fixes your car and doesn't ask too many questions. But you don't love me. I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we figure out how to end this thing with as little mess as possible. But even as I said it, I knew there was going to be a lot of mess. I was going to make sure of it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of lawyers, awkward conversations, and sleeping in the guest room that smelled like the lavender air freshener Emily used throughout the house. She tried to talk to me several times, appearing in doorways with tear-stained faces and apologies that sounded rehearsed. I listened politely and said nothing. But I wasn't doing nothing. I was planning. Red noticed the change in my demeanor immediately when I showed up at the gym Monday morning with a new intensity that had nothing to do with physical fitness. You look different, he said as I wrapped my hands, like a man with a purpose. I have a purpose, I said, throwing a combination at the heavy bag that made it jump on its chain. I'm going to destroy the son of a bitch who's been sleeping with my wife. Careful, Sammy. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it can also give you indigestion. I'd hired a private investigator, a former cop named Jerry Martinez who specialized in divorce cases. Jerry was expensive, but he was thorough. Within a week, he'd provided me with a complete dossier on Nick Pumper Russo that read like a sleazy novel. 34 years old, junior partner at Hartwell and Associates, divorced twice, currently paying alimony to both ex-wives. He drove a red Porsche that he couldn't afford, lived in a downtown condo that was mortgaged to the hilt, and had a reputation around town as a serial cheater who targeted married women. Guy's a real piece of work, Jerry told me as we sat in his cramped office, looking through surveillance photos. I've been watching him for a week, and he's got at least 2 other women on the string besides your wife. The photos showed Nick and Emily at various locations around town. The rooftop bar she'd mentioned, a hotel restaurant, the parking garage at her office building. In every picture, they looked like teenagers sneaking around, holding hands, stealing kisses, completely oblivious to the camera documenting their affair. What about his work situation? I asked. Jerry flipped through his notes. That's where it gets interesting. Turns out Mr. Russo has been using firm resources for personal business. He's got a side hustle selling supplements to guys at his gym, and he's been using the firm's mailing address, their copy machine, even their conference room for meetings. That's got to be against firm policy. Oh, it is. I've got documentation. Photos of him conducting supplement sales meetings in the conference room, copies of invoices he's been printing on the firm's letterhead. The partners at Hartwell and Associates would not be happy if they knew what junior partner Russo was up to. I studied the photos of Nick, tall, muscular, with the kind of artificial tan that screamed insecurity. He had perfectly styled hair and wore expensive suits that probably cost more than I made in a month. He looked like exactly the kind of guy who would seduce married women and think he was clever for getting away with it. "There's more," Jerry said, pulling out another file. "Your wife's friend Becca. She's been feeding information to your wife about the investigation." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean someone's been telling your wife that you hired a PI, someone who knew details that only a few people could know. I did some digging, and it turns out Becca works in HR at Hartwell and Associates. She has access to personnel files, employee records, internal communications. So she's been helping Emily cover her tracks. More than that, I think she's been orchestrating this whole thing from the beginning." Jerry showed me more photos. Becca meeting with Nick at a coffee shop, Becca and Emily having lunch, Becca entering Nick's apartment building. The timeline he'd constructed showed a pattern of meetings and communications that suggested something more complex than a simple affair. "Why would Becca do that?" Jerry shrugged. "Could be a dozen reasons. Maybe she's jealous of your wife. Maybe she's got her own thing going with Russo. Maybe she just likes drama. In my experience, there's always someone pulling strings behind the scenes in these situations." I left Jerry's office with a box full of evidence and a plan that was starting to take shape. Emily thought she was being clever, sneaking around with her junior partner boyfriend while her best friend covered for her. But they'd underestimated me. They thought I was just some blue-collar engineer who would roll over and take whatever scraps they threw at me. They were about to learn otherwise. That evening, I found Emily in the kitchen, making herself a salad for dinner. She'd lost weight over the past 2 weeks, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. She looked up hopefully when I walked in. "Sam, I made enough salad for 2 if you want some." "No thanks, I already ate." I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the box of evidence. "But I did want to show you something." Emily's face went pale when she saw the surveillance photos. She sank into the chair across from me, staring at pictures of herself and Nick holding hands, kissing, entering his apartment building. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter? The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She flipped through the photos with shaking hands. "Sam, I know this looks bad." "It looks exactly like what it is. You having an affair with a married man who's been cheating on his wife with multiple women." "Multiple women?" I showed her the other surveillance photos. Nick with a brunette at a restaurant, Nick with a redhead at a hotel bar, Nick entering an apartment building with a woman who wasn't Emily. "Your boyfriend's been busy. You're not his only side piece, Emily. You're just one of several." Emily stared at the photos, her face cycling through emotions: shock, hurt, anger, humiliation. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. "Of course you didn't. Because you were too busy lying to me to pay attention to what he was doing." I pulled out the documentation of Nick's business dealings. "Did you know he's been using your firm's resources to run a supplement business? Using their conference rooms, their equipment, their mailing address?" Emily's eyes widened as she read through the invoices and meeting notes. "This could get him fired." "It should get him fired. The question is, do you want to be collateral damage when it happens?" She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "What do you mean?" "I mean you have a choice to make. You can keep sneaking around with a guy who's playing you for a fool, or you can help me make sure he faces consequences for what he's done." "What kind of consequences?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "The kind that will make him regret ever hearing your name." Emily stared at me for a long moment. then at the photos scattered across the table. When she looked up again, something had changed in her expression. The hopeful, apologetic look was gone, replaced by something harder. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to set him up. One last meeting, somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses, and I want you to record the conversation." "Sam, I don't know if I can." "You can, and you will. Because if you don't, I'm taking all of this evidence to the partners at your firm tomorrow morning, and then everyone will know exactly what kind of woman you are." It was blackmail, pure and simple, but I was past caring about playing fair. Emily had thrown away 8 years of marriage for a few months of excitement with a man who saw her as nothing more than another conquest. Now it was time for both of them to pay the price. Emily gathered up the photos with trembling hands. "When do you want me to do this?" "This weekend. There's a charity fundraiser at the community center Saturday night. Half the town will be there, including people from your firm. It's the perfect place for a very public conversation." "And after that?" "After that, we're done. You can have your divorce, your freedom, and whatever's left of your reputation. But Nick Russo is going to learn that there are consequences for destroying other people's lives." Emily nodded slowly, then stood up and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, she turned back to me. "Sam, for what it's worth, I really am sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't fix anything. Actions do." After she went upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal and planned the final act of our marriage. It was going to be spectacular. Saturday night arrived with a clarity that felt almost supernatural. Every detail seemed sharper, more vivid. The way my tie felt against my throat, the sound of Emily's heels on the hardwood floor, the smell of her perfume as she passed by me in the hallway. It was like watching a movie of my own life, except I was both the director and the star. Emily looked stunning in a navy blue dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. She'd spent 2 hours getting ready, and the result was flawless. Hair perfectly styled, makeup expertly applied, jewelry that caught the light when she moved. She looked like a woman going to meet her lover, not her husband. "You look beautiful," I told her as we walked to the car. "Thank you." Her voice was quiet, nervous. "Sam, about tonight. Everything's going to be fine. Just stick to the plan." The community center was decorated with white lights and autumn flowers, transforming the utilitarian space into something almost elegant. The annual charity fundraiser was one of the town's biggest social events, drawing everyone from city council members to local business owners. It was exactly the kind of gathering where reputations were made and destroyed. I spotted Nick Russo immediately. He was standing near the bar, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He had that artificial confidence that comes from expensive clothes and a good haircut, the kind of swagger that made women notice him and men want to punch him. "There he is," I murmured to Emily. She followed my gaze and tensed. "Sam, I don't think I can do this." "You can, and you will. Remember, this is your chance to make things right." Emily nodded and walked across the room toward Nick. I watched from a distance as she approached him, saw his face light up when he spotted her. He leaned down to kiss her cheek, his hand lingering on her waist in a way that made my jaw clench. I circulated through the crowd, making small talk with neighbors and colleagues, keeping one eye on Emily and Nick. They looked like any other couple at a social gathering, laughing, touching, completely absorbed in each other. To anyone watching, they looked perfect together, which made what happened next even more devastating. Emily had positioned herself near the auction table, where a small crowd had gathered to bid on donated items. Nick was standing beside her, his hand on the small of her back, when she suddenly pulled out her phone and held it up. "Nick," she said loudly enough for the nearby crowd to hear, "I need to ask you something." He looked confused but smiled. "Sure, babe. What's up?" Are you sleeping with other women besides me? The conversation around them stopped. People turned to stare, sensing drama in the way that crowds always do. Nick's face went from confusion to panic in about 2 seconds. Emily, what are you talking about? This isn't the place. It's a simple question. Are you sleeping with other married women while you're sleeping with me? Nick glanced around at the growing audience, his face flushing red. Emily, you're being crazy. Let's talk about this somewhere private. No, let's talk about it right here, in front of all these people, including the partners from your law firm. I saw Nick's eyes widen as he spotted his bosses across the room. They were watching the scene unfold with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for traffic accidents. And while we're at it, Emily continued, her voice getting louder, let's talk about how you've been using the firm's conference room to sell supplements, and how you've been printing invoices on company letterhead for your little side business. Nick grabbed Emily's arm, trying to pull her away from the crowd. You need to stop talking, right now. Don't touch me, Emily said, jerking her arm away. Don't ever touch me again. The crowd was fully engaged now, phones coming out to record the drama. I could see people whispering, pointing, enjoying the spectacle of a public breakup between two people who'd been carrying on an affair. Nick looked around desperately, realizing that his reputation was being destroyed in real time. His bosses were already walking toward him, their faces grim. Other people were backing away, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. You're going to regret this, Nick hissed at Emily. The only thing I regret, Emily said clearly, is believing anything you told me. She turned and walked away, leaving Nick standing alone in the center of a circle of staring people. I watched as his bosses reached him, saw one of them say something in a low, angry voice. Nick's face went white, and he nodded quickly, like a student being scolded by the principal. I followed Emily outside, where she was standing in the parking lot, shaking. How do you feel? I asked. Terrible, humiliated, angry. She looked up at me, but also relieved. Good. That's exactly how you should feel. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. Emily had publicly destroyed Nick Russo's reputation and probably ended his career. She'd also publicly admitted to having an affair, which meant her own reputation was in ruins too. But that was just the beginning. Monday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the offices of Hartwell & Associates. I had an appointment with the senior partner, a man named William Hartwell, who'd built his firm on a reputation for integrity and professionalism. Mr. Carter, Hartwell said, as I sat down in his opulent office, I understand you have some information about one of our associates. I opened my briefcase and pulled out copies of all the evidence Jerry had gathered, photos of Nick's supplement business meetings in the conference room, invoices printed on company letterhead, documentation of his use of company resources for personal business. Hartwell reviewed the documents with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent 40 years practicing law. When he finished, he looked up at me with grim satisfaction. Mr. Russo's employment with this firm was terminated this morning, he said. We don't tolerate this kind of behavior. What about my wife? Mrs. Carter is a talented attorney, but her judgment has been questionable. She's been placed on probation pending a full review of her conduct. I left the law firm feeling like I'd accomplished something, but I wasn't done yet. Nick Russo had destroyed my marriage and humiliated me in front of the entire town. A lost job wasn't enough punishment for that. I drove to Red's gym, where I knew Nick worked out. He was there, pounding away at a heavy bag with the kind of desperate intensity that comes from having your entire life fall apart in the span of a weekend. Nick, I called out. He turned, and I could see the moment he recognized me. His face went from confusion to fear to anger in rapid succession. You, he said. You did this. I didn't do anything. You did it to yourself when you decided to sleep with my wife. Nick stepped away from the heavy bag, his hands still wrapped for boxing. He was bigger than me, younger, in better shape, but he was also rattled, desperate, not thinking clearly. "Your wife came to me," he said. "She was unhappy, neglected. I just gave her what she needed. What she needed was a husband who paid attention. What you gave her was lies and false promises. You don't know anything about what happened between us. I know everything. I know about the other women, the business deals, the lies you told her. I know you're a fraud and a cheat who destroys families for sport." Nick took a step toward me, his fists clenched. "You want to settle this like men?" "I thought you'd never ask." Red appeared beside us, having sensed trouble. "Boys, let's take this to the ring. No point in breaking up my gym over a woman." 5 minutes later, Nick and I were facing each other in the boxing ring, gloves on, mouth guards in. A small crowd had gathered to watch, including several guys who knew both of us and were eager to see how this would play out. 3 rounds, Red announced. "Clean fight, no dirty shots." The bell rang, and Nick came at me like a man possessed. He was strong, fast, technically skilled, but he was fighting angry, and angry fighters make mistakes. I let him tire himself out in the first round, absorbing his combinations, staying defensive, waiting for my opportunity. In the second round, I started countering, finding openings in his guard, landing clean shots that snapped his head back. By the third round, Nick was exhausted and frustrated. He dropped his guard for just a moment, and I caught him with a right cross that sent him to the canvas. He got up at the count of 8, but he was finished. I could see it in his eyes. The defeat, the humiliation, the realization that he'd lost everything. The bell rang, ending the fight. I'd won a clear decision, but more importantly, I'd made my point. Nick Russo had been publicly humiliated, professionally destroyed, and physically beaten. His reputation in this town was finished. As I left the gym, Red walked me to my car. "Feel better?" he asked. "Getting there," I said. "But I'm not done yet." "What else is there to do? You've destroyed the guy's life." I looked back at the gym, where Nick was sitting on a bench, holding an ice pack to his face. "I want him gone," I said. "Out of this town, away from my wife, away from me. I want him to understand that there are consequences for what he did." "And if he doesn't leave?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "Then I'll make him wish he had."